The arrival. Ethan was not in the mood for surprises, but life rarely asked for his permission. As a young scientist scraping by in the bustling chaos of New York City, his days were already packed with endless experiments and nights filled with failed calculations. So, when a government representative knocked on his door with a peculiar offer, Ethan should have slammed it shut. But curiosity got the better of him. "Meet your new roommate," the man said, gesturing to the figure beside him. Ethan blinked. Standing in the hallway was the strangest being he had ever seen. It wasn't human, at least not entirely. Its skin shimmered like molten silver under the dim hallway light, and its glowing blue eyes radiated a calm intensity. It stood awkwardly, holding a small suitcase in one hand and a cube-shaped device in the other. Hi," Ethan managed, unsure if he was supposed to shake hands or just run. "I am Scifi," the figure said, its voice oddly melodic. "It is an honor to coexist in your living quarters. I have been assigned here to study human life." Ethan frowned. Study human life? What does that mean? The government agent handed Ethan a thick folder. "This is Scifi. It's part of an intergalactic exchange program. We believe learning from each other's species will be beneficial. Your job is simple. Live your life as you normally would and answer any questions Scifi has. You'll be compensated generously." Ethan wanted to say no, but when he heard the amount of money involved, his resolve crumbled. Rent was overdue, his fridge was empty, and his bank account had been glaring at him with a red balance for weeks. "Fine," he muttered, stepping aside. "Welcome to my home." Scifi walked into the apartment, its movements smooth yet deliberate, as if it were trying to mimic human behavior. It scanned the room with an intense gaze, its glowing eyes darting from the sofa to the cluttered coffee table, where empty coffee cups and half-read books were stacked like a mini skyscraper. "This living arrangement is adequate," Scifi said, nodding approvingly. "I am eager to learn." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, well, don't get too comfortable. I have rules. No weird alien experiments, no touching my stuff, and no, mind control or whatever it is you guys do." Scifi tilted its head, genuinely puzzled. Mind control? That is an intriguing assumption. Do humans fear such abilities? Ethan sighed. "Let's not find out." That evening, as Ethan prepared dinner, Scifi stood silently in the kitchen, observing his every move. Its fascination was unnerving. "Why are you staring at me?" Ethan asked, chopping vegetables with more force than necessary. "I am analyzing your techniques. Human nourishment is remarkably diverse," Scifi replied. It leaned closer, its shimmering skin catching the kitchen light. "May I inquire about your reproductive customs?" Ethan froze mid-chop. "Excuse me. Reproduction. It is a critical aspect of survival for most species. My mission requires an understanding of human breeding practices." Ethan nearly dropped the knife. "Whoa, hold on. That's not dinner conversation." Scifi tilted its head again, the gesture oddly bird-like. "I apologize if the topic is inappropriate. However, it is crucial for my study. I must understand the complexities of human pair bonding, mating rituals, and genetic compatibility." Ethan groaned. "Look, Scifi, humans don't talk about that stuff casually. It's personal, emotional, complicated." "Complicated?" Scifi echoed, its glowing eyes narrowing. "Explain." Ethan grabbed a plate and handed Scifi a slice of pizza instead. "Eat this first, then we'll talk." After dinner, Ethan slumped onto the couch, already regretting his decision to let Scifi stay. The alien sat beside him, holding a notepad it had apparently materialized out of thin air. "May I ask another question?" Scifi said, its tone polite but insistent. "Do I have a choice?" Ethan muttered. "Why do humans form emotional attachments before reproduction? Would it not be more efficient to focus solely on genetic compatibility?" Ethan stared at it, unsure whether to laugh or cry. It's not about efficiency. Humans, we need connection, trust, love. It's what makes relationships meaningful. Sinar scribbled something down, its glowing eyes flickering with interest. Fascinating. So, love is a prerequisite for reproduction. Not always, Ethan admitted, but it makes things better. Look, it's hard to explain. You're not going to understand human emotions overnight. Sinar nodded solemnly. Understood. I will continue my observations. The night dragged on, and Ethan found himself growing more tired by the minute. Sinar, on the other hand, seemed tireless. It paced the living room, occasionally pausing to inspect objects with a mix of curiosity and confusion. When it finally picked up a biology book from Ethan's shelf, it stopped dead in its tracks. This contains diagrams of human anatomy, Sinar said, flipping through the pages. Are you an expert in reproduction? Ethan groaned. No, that's just for work. I'm a scientist. That doesn't mean I know everything about relationships. Sinar's glowing eyes brightened. Then perhaps you can assist me. Together, we can create a detailed report on human mating practices. Ethan buried his face in his hands. This is going to be a nightmare. By the time Ethan went to bed, he was already dreading the days ahead. But as he lay in the dark, he couldn't shake the feeling that Sinar's presence was more than just an inconvenience. The alien's curiosity hinted at something deeper, something he wasn't ready to face. What exactly had he gotten himself into? The misunderstanding. Ethan woke up the next morning to the sound of soft humming. For a moment, he thought it was the radiator acting up again. But as he shuffled out of his bedroom, bleary-eyed and craving coffee, he found Sinar sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of the television, watching what appeared to be a romantic comedy. The alien was utterly engrossed. Its shimmering silver hands held a notebook, where it was furiously jotting down notes. On the screen, a couple was in the middle of a heated argument, their voices rising over dramatic music. Sinar, Ethan groaned, rubbing his temples. What are you doing? Sinar looked up, its glowing blue eyes bright with excitement. Good morning, Ethan. I am conducting research. These audiovisual materials are remarkably informative about human bonding rituals. Ethan blinked at the screen. You're watching When Love Sparks. That's not research. It's a cheesy rom-com. Sinar tilted its head, genuinely puzzled. Rom-com. Is this not an accurate representation of human interactions? Ethan sighed and shuffled into the kitchen to make coffee. No, it's fiction. Over the top and exaggerated. Real relationships don't work like that. Sinar followed him, notebook in hand. But this media depicts conflict, resolution, and eventual reproductive pairing. Is this not the essence of human relationships? Ethan poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter. Relationships are way more complex than that. People don't just fall in love after one dramatic fight or a musical montage. Sinar scribbled furiously. Fascinating. Then how does one achieve successful bonding? Are there specific rituals? Patterns? Ethan took a long sip of coffee, already regretting his decision to engage. There's no formula. People connect through shared experiences, trust, and emotions. And sometimes it just happens. Sinar frowned, or at least Ethan thought it did. The alien's expressions were hard to read. This unpredictability is inefficient. It complicates data collection. Well, welcome to being human, Ethan muttered. The next few days were chaotic. Sinar's attempts to understand human relationships grew increasingly bizarre. Ethan came home one evening to find the alien hunched over his laptop, creating a detailed spreadsheet. What are you doing now? He asked, throwing his bag on the couch. I am analyzing compatibility. Sinar replied. I used your social media profiles to identify potential mates for you. These individuals share your interests and genetic markers. Ethan's jaw dropped. You what? You hacked my social media. Hacked. Sinar seemed confused. Your data was publicly accessible. I merely utilized it for research purposes. Ethan groaned. That's not the point. You can't just meddle in my personal life. But your progress in bonding is insufficient, Kynar argued. I am here to assist. Ethan threw up his hands. I don't need help. And even if I did, I wouldn't trust an alien algorithm to set me up. Sinar tilted its head thoughtfully. Humans are resistant to external assistance. Noted. Undeterred, Sinar decided to expand its research. It began observing people in the neighborhood, taking notes on their interactions. This led to several awkward encounters. At the local coffee shop, Sinar approached a couple arguing over their order. Excuse me, it said, its melodic voice startling them. Your conflict appears unresolved. May I suggest a resolution strategy based on mutual compromise? The couple stared, speechless, before grabbing their drinks and leaving in a hurry. Back at the apartment, Ethan was livid. You can't just go up to strangers and meddle in their lives. That's not how humans work. But their disagreement was impeding progress. Kynar said earnestly, intervention was necessary. Ethan rubbed his temples. No, it wasn't. Humans need space. You can't force things to happen. Sinar seemed to ponder this. Humans value autonomy. Interesting. The tipping point came when Sinar decided to test a prototype device it had been secretly building. Ethan walked into the apartment one night to find Sinar adjusting a small, cube-shaped gadget on the coffee table. The device emitted a faint hum, its surface glowing faintly. What is that? Ethan asked warily. My solution to human inefficiency, Kynar said proudly. This device enhances emotional bonding by emitting neural synchronization pulses. Ethan stared. You built a mind control device. It is not mind control, Kynar insisted. It merely facilitates harmony. With this, humans will no longer struggle with miscommunication or emotional conflict. Ethan's heart sank. You can't use that on people. That's. Before he could finish, the device activated, sending out a soft pulse. Ethan felt a strange warmth in his chest, followed by an overwhelming sense of affection. Toward the houseplant in the corner. What the? Ethan shook his head, snapping out of it. He turned to Sinar. Shut it off. Now. Sinar hesitated, but the affix. Now. With a reluctant nod, Sinar deactivated the device. Ethan slumped onto the couch, glaring at the alien. You can't just mess with people's feelings like that. Emotions aren't something you can control with a gadget. Sinar looked genuinely puzzled. But why? If the outcome is positive, does the method matter? Ethan leaned forward, his voice firm. Yes, it matters. Because emotions, relationships, love, they're real when they're messy and imperfect. You can't take shortcuts. Sinar fell silent, its glowing eyes dimming slightly. For the first time, it seemed unsure of itself. That night, as Ethan lay in bed, he couldn't help but wonder if Sinar would ever understand humans. But deep down, he realized something. Maybe it wasn't just Sinar learning about humanity. Maybe he had something to learn too. The experiment begins. Ethan had barely started his morning coffee when he noticed Sinar fiddling with its strange cube-shaped device again. The alien was seated cross-legged on the floor, its glowing blue eyes fixed intently on the gadget. Sparks of soft, golden light flickered around the device, and it emitted a faint, rhythmic hum. What now? Ethan asked, setting his mug down. He was already bracing for whatever madness Sinar had in mind. Tell me the thing isn't going to mess with people's emotions again. Sinar glanced up, its silver skin shimmering in the sunlight filtering through the window. This device is a refinement of my earlier prototype. I have removed the unintended side effects. Ethan raised an eyebrow. And what exactly does it do now? Sinar straightened, looking almost proud. It enhances mutual understanding by aligning neural pathways. This will allow humans to connect emotionally on a deeper level. Ethan groaned. So, it's still a mind control device. It is not mind control. Sinar insisted. It's melodic voice calm. It merely reduces emotional barriers. Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose. Look, Sinar, humans don't need an alien device to connect. Relationships are messy for a reason. People have to figure things out on their own. Sinar tilted its head, as it often did when pondering something. But your species struggles with miscommunication and emotional conflict. Why not eliminate these inefficiencies? Ethan sighed. Because those struggles are part of what make relationships real. Without them, we're just robots following a script. Sinar stared at him for a long moment before turning back to the device. Perhaps a live demonstration will clarify the benefits. Ethan's eyes widened. What do you mean, live demonstration? Sinar. No. Before he could stop it, Sinar pressed a button on the cube. The device emitted a bright flash of light, followed by a low hum that seemed to pulse through the room. Ethan felt a strange warmth wash over him, like stepping into a sunbeam on a cold day. But before he could process the sensation, Sinar grabbed the device and stood up. Where are you going with that? Ethan demanded. To conduct a field test, Sinar replied matter-of-factly. Your local gathering place will provide an ideal environment. Ethan's heart sank. Local gathering place? You mean the coffee shop? Sinar nodded. Correct. Humans frequently socialize there. It is the perfect location to observe the device's effects in a controlled setting. Ethan grabbed his jacket. Oh no, you don't. You're not turning the coffee shop into your personal lab experiment. By the time Ethan caught up with Sinar, the alien was already inside the coffee shop, standing in the middle of the crowded space with its device in hand. The usual morning buzz of conversation and the hiss of the espresso machine filled the air. Sinar. Ethan hissed, trying not to draw attention. Put that thing away. But Sinar was undeterred. Greetings, fellow humans, it announced, raising its device. I am here to facilitate enhanced emotional connections. The room fell silent as everyone turned to stare at the shimmering alien. A few people gasped. Others just gawked, their coffee cups frozen mid-sip. What is that thing? Someone whispered. Some kind of performance art. Another murmured. Ethan groaned and pushed his way through the crowd. It's not performance art. He's my roommate. Sorry about this. But before Ethan could reach Sinar, the alien activated the device. A soft pulse of light rippled through the room, and the hum grew louder. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the atmosphere in the coffee shop shifted. At first, it was subtle. Two strangers at a nearby table struck up a conversation, their awkward small talk quickly transforming into animated chatter. A barista who had been scowling moments ago suddenly flashed a bright smile at a customer. Across the room, a man and a woman who had been arguing fell silent, their expressions softening as they gazed at each other. Ethan watched in disbelief. You've got to be kidding me. Sinar beamed, or at least, its glowing eyes seemed brighter. The device is functioning as intended. Observe the harmony. But as the minutes passed, things started to get weird. One man stood up and loudly declared his undying love for the woman in line behind him, who looked both flattered and terrified. Two elderly ladies at a corner table began laughing uncontrollably, tears streaming down their faces. A group of teenagers in the corner suddenly broke into a spontaneous group hug. Ethan turned to Sinar. This isn't harmony. It's chaos. Sinar frowned. The intensity of the responses is unexpected. Perhaps I underestimated the complexity of human emotions. You think, Ethan snapped. Turn it off before this gets any worse. Sinar hesitated, glancing around the room. But the results. Now. With a reluctant sigh, Sinar pressed a button on the device. The hum stopped, and the strange glow faded. The coffee shop fell eerily quiet as everyone seemed to snap out of whatever trance they'd been in. People looked around, confused, as if waking from a dream. What just happened? Someone muttered. I don't know, another said. That was weird. Ethan grabbed Sinar by the arm and dragged it outside before anyone could ask questions. You're lucky no one called the cops, he hissed. Sinar looked genuinely puzzled, but the experiment was a success. Many individuals experienced positive interactions. Ethan glared at it. Yeah, and others were seconds away from a nervous breakdown. You can't mess with people's emotions like that. Sinar's glowing eyes dimmed slightly. I was only trying to help. Ethan sighed, his frustration ebbing slightly. I know, but humans aren't lab rats. Sinar, if you really want to understand us, you need to stop trying to control everything. Sinar nodded slowly. Perhaps you are correct. I will revise my approach. Ethan rubbed his temples, already dreading what revising might mean. Let's just go home. And for the love of all things human, leave that device turned off. The complications. Back at the apartment, Ethan slammed the door shut behind him and spun around to face Sinar, who was cradling its device as if it were a delicate artifact. The alien's glowing eyes flickered faintly, a sign, Ethan had learned, that Sinar was processing the events. What were you thinking? Ethan asked, his voice a mix of anger and exhaustion. You can't just experiment on people like that. Do you know how much trouble you could have caused? Sinar placed the device carefully on the coffee table and straightened, its posture as calm as ever. The experiment revealed valuable data. Humans display a spectrum of emotional responses when neural alignment is adjusted. This knowledge will. Stop, Ethan interrupted, holding up a hand. This isn't about your data. You invaded people's lives, their emotions, without their consent. That's not okay. Sinar tilted its head, that familiar gesture of alien confusion. Your species' fixation on consent is peculiar. Efficiency dictates action without unnecessary delays. Ethan's jaw dropped. Peculiar. Sinar, it's not just a human thing. It's a basic moral principle. People have the right to make their own choices. Sinar's glowing eyes dimmed slightly, the alien equivalent of a frown. Then how do humans achieve progress if every action requires approval? Ethan threw up his hands. We argue, we debate, we screw up and learn from it. It's messy, but it's how we grow. What you're doing, it's taking away people's ability to choose, to feel things naturally. That's not progress. That's manipulation. For the next few days, Sinar seemed to retreat into itself. It stopped asking Ethan questions and spent hours silently tinkering with its device. Ethan felt a mix of relief and unease. He didn't trust Sinar to leave things alone, and his suspicion was confirmed one night when he stumbled upon the alien in the kitchen, staring intently at a glowing holographic blueprint. What now? Ethan asked, crossing his arms. Sinar didn't look up. I am recalibrating the device to address the unintended side effects. The alignment pulse will be less intrusive, targeting only individuals with high emotional discord. Ethan groaned. Sinar, no. We've been over this. You can't fix people with a machine. Humans repair physical ailments with machines. Sinar countered. Why should emotions be different? Ethan shook his head. Because emotions aren't like a broken bone or a faulty engine. They're complicated. You can't just zap people into feeling better. Sinar finally looked at him, its glowing eyes narrowing. Your resistance to this solution is illogical. You yourself experience emotional discord. Perhaps this is why your species struggles, because you refuse to embrace efficiency. Ethan froze. What's that supposed to mean? You avoid meaningful connections. Sinar said bluntly. Your social interactions are limited. You have unresolved tensions with individuals from your past. This hinders your personal growth. Ethan felt a pang of anger. You don't know anything about my life. I observe patterns, Sinar replied. You avoid vulnerability. Is this not why your species remains inefficient in emotional development? Ethan opened his mouth to argue but stopped. He hated to admit it, but Sinar wasn't entirely wrong. Still, he wasn't about to let an alien lecture him on his personal life. Even if that's true, he said, it doesn't give you the right to mess with people's emotions. That's not how you solve problems. Sinar seemed to consider this for a moment, its glowing eyes dimming slightly. Perhaps you are correct. Emotional development may require more nuanced approaches. However, the question remains, how does one resolve discord without external intervention? Ethan sighed, his anger giving way to exhaustion. By talking to people. By working through problems together. It's not fast or easy, but it's real. Later that week, Ethan's worst fears were realized. While he was out running errands, Sinar decided to take its revised device for another test. This time, it targeted the entire apartment building. Ethan returned to find his neighbors acting strangely. The usually grumpy Mr. Lawson from 3B was baking cookies and handing them out to everyone in the lobby. Mrs. Patel, who never spoke above a whisper, was belting out a love song on the stairwell. Even the perpetually bickering couple from 4A was sitting on the couch in the common area, holding hands and smiling like newlyweds. What the hell is going on? Ethan muttered, pushing through the crowd. When he reached his floor, he found Sinar standing in the hallway, its device glowing softly in its hands. "You've got to be kidding me," Ethan said, his voice rising. Sinar turned, its glowing eyes bright. The adjustments were successful. The alignment pulse is now targeted and efficient. Emotional discord has been significantly reduced. Ethan grabbed the device and powered it down, his frustration boiling over. "You're not fixing anything, Sinar. You're just papering over the cracks. These people are going to wake up and feel worse than before because none of this is real." Sinar stared at him, its calm demeanor unshaken. "If the outcome is positive, does it matter if the method is artificial?" "Yes," Ethan snapped. "It matters because people need to confront their problems, not have them swept under the rug. Life isn't about shortcuts." For the first time, Sinar seemed genuinely unsure of itself. Its glowing eyes dimmed as it looked around at the now quiet hallway. "Perhaps I have misunderstood the nature of your species." "Yeah," Ethan said, his voice softening. "You have, but it's not too late to learn." Sinar nodded slowly, its hands tightening around the device. "I will deactivate the alignment pulse and conduct no further experiments without your guidance." Ethan let out a long breath. "Good. And maybe next time, you can try asking for consent before you mess with people's lives." That night, as the building returned to normal, Ethan found himself sitting on the couch next to Sinar, who was quietly disassembling its device. For the first time since the alien had arrived, Ethan felt a strange sense of camaraderie. "You know," he said, "if you really want to understand humans, you could just talk to us. No gadgets, no experiments. Just ask questions." Sinar glanced at him, its glowing eyes brightening faintly. "I will consider this approach." Ethan smirked. "Good, because if you pull another stunt like that, I'm kicking you out." Sinar tilted its head. "Understood." For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt like maybe, just maybe, having an alien roommate wouldn't be so bad after all. The confrontation. Ethan had hoped that Sinar's promise to stop experimenting would hold, but deep down, he wasn't entirely convinced. Sure enough, 2 days later, he walked into the apartment to find Sinar standing in front of a holographic projection of the city, the alignment device glowing ominously on the table. Ethan froze. "What are you doing now?" Sinar turned, its shimmering skin reflecting the light of the hologram. "I have recalibrated the alignment pulse for a broader application. The current settings will target individuals experiencing extreme emotional discord across the city." Ethan's blood ran cold. "The city? Are you out of your mind? You're not just messing with a coffee shop or an apartment building anymore. You're talking about millions of people." Sinar's glowing eyes brightened. "Precisely. The scale of this experiment will provide invaluable data. With one pulse, I can reduce conflict and enhance harmony across your entire population. Ethan stormed over and slapped his hands down on the table. No, you're not doing this. I told you, people need to work through their problems on their own. You can't just fix everyone with a gadget. Sinar didn't back down. Your resistance is illogical, Ethan. Your species is plagued by unnecessary suffering. Wars, arguments, broken relationships, all of these could be mitigated with a simple adjustment to neural alignment. Ethan shook his head, his frustration mounting. It's not that simple, Sinar. Life isn't supposed to be perfect. Struggle is part of what makes us human. It's how we grow, how we learn to appreciate the good things. Sinar tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. And yet, you resist growth in your own life. You avoid connection, isolate yourself, and allow unresolved emotions to fester. Is this not hypocritical? Ethan clenched his fists, anger flaring in his chest. This isn't about me. It's about you playing God with people's lives. Sinar stepped closer, its voice calm but firm. You fear change, Ethan. But change is necessary for progress. Ethan knew he couldn't win the argument with words alone. Sinar was too logical, too focused on its mission. If he wanted to stop the alien, he'd have to act. When Sinar turned back to the hologram, Ethan lunged for the device, his hands gripping the cube. But Sinar reacted faster than he expected. In a blur of movement, it grabbed his wrist, its grip surprisingly strong. Do not interfere, Sinar said, its melodic voice tinged with warning. This is for the greater good. Ethan struggled against its hold. No, it's not. You don't get to decide what's best for us. The room erupted in chaos as they wrestled for control of the device. Sparks flew from the cube as Ethan's fingers brushed one of the buttons, triggering a surge of energy that rippled through the room. For a moment, everything went still. Then, the hologram of the city flickered and disappeared. Sinar released Ethan and stepped back, its glowing eyes dimming. You have disrupted the calibration, it said, its voice colder than usual. Ethan clutched the device tightly, his heart pounding. Good, because you're not doing this, Sinar. I don't care how noble you think your intentions are. You're wrong. Sinar studied him for a long moment, its alien features unreadable. You are willing to risk continued suffering for the sake of free will. Why? Ethan took a deep breath, his grip on the device loosening slightly. Because free will is what makes us who we are. It's messy and painful, but it's also beautiful. Without it, we're not really living. Sinar seemed to consider this, its glowing eyes flickering faintly. Your perspective is intriguing. Perhaps my understanding of your species is incomplete. Yeah, Ethan said, his voice softening. It is. But that doesn't mean you can't learn. You just have to stop trying to control everything. Sinar nodded slowly, its glowing eyes dimming as it reached out a hand. May I have the device? Ethan hesitated, his instincts screaming at him not to trust the alien. But something in Sinar's demeanor had changed. Reluctantly, he handed over the cube. Sinar held the device in its hands, studying it for a moment before pressing a series of buttons. The cube's glow faded, and the hum ceased. The alignment pulse has been deactivated permanently. Ethan let out a long breath of relief. Thank you. Sinar set the device down on the table. I will dismantle this technology and refocus my efforts on understanding your species through observation and dialogue. Ethan smirked. Now you're starting to get it. That night, as Ethan sat on the couch, he couldn't shake the feeling that the confrontation had changed something, not just for Sinar, but for himself. He realized that, for all his anger and frustration, Sinar's presence had forced him to confront parts of himself he'd been avoiding for years. As Sinar worked quietly in the corner, dismantling the device piece by piece, Ethan felt a strange sense of gratitude. Maybe having an alien roommate wasn't so bad after all. Hey, Sinar, he said, breaking the silence. The alien looked up. Yes, Ethan. Thanks for listening, he said. And, for not trying to brainwash the city. Sinar tilted its head, its glowing eyes brightening slightly. You are welcome. Perhaps there is more to learn from you than I initially anticipated. Ethan chuckled. Yeah, well, don't get used to me being a role model. Sinar's eyes flickered with something that might have been amusement. Noted. The breakthrough. For the next several days, the apartment was unusually quiet. Sinar no longer tinkered with the alignment device, and Ethan noticed a shift in the alien's behavior. Instead of obsessing over experiments, Sinar spent its time observing more mundane aspects of human life. It asked thoughtful questions, sometimes catching Ethan off guard with its depth. One evening, as Ethan sat on the couch flipping through TV channels, Sinar joined him, holding a notebook filled with neat alien script. The glow of its eyes reflected the flickering screen. Ethan, Sinar said, breaking the silence, I have been reflecting on our recent interaction. Your insistence on the value of struggle and imperfection is intriguing. Ethan paused, looking over at the alien. Yeah, what about it? Sinar set the notebook down on the coffee table. Your species thrives despite inefficiency, conflict, failure, emotional turbulence. These are factors that would hinder most civilizations. Yet humans continue to progress. I find this paradox fascinating. Ethan chuckled. We're stubborn, I guess. We don't like giving up, even when things get hard. Sinar tilted its head, considering this. Stubbornness. An intriguing trait. Perhaps it is this resilience that defines humanity. Ethan shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe we're just too dumb to quit. Sinar's glowing eyes brightened slightly, a sign that Ethan had come to recognize as its version of amusement. Your self-deprecating humor is another anomaly. Most species I have studied prioritize self-preservation and pride. Humans, however, often deflect with humor. Why? Ethan smirked. Because sometimes laughing at yourself is the best way to deal with life. If you can't laugh, what's the point? That night, Ethan found himself talking more openly with Sinar than he ever had before. It wasn't just the alien's curiosity. It was the way Sinar listened, genuinely trying to understand. You know, Ethan said, leaning back on the couch, when you first showed up, I thought you were just another problem I didn't need. But now, I don't know. I guess I'm starting to get why you're here. Sinar looked at him, its glowing eyes steady. Explain. Ethan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. You're not just here to study us. You're here to learn how to be, well, human. And maybe that's not something you can learn from books or devices. Maybe it's something you figure out by living it. Sinar seemed to absorb this, its shimmering skin catching the light of the TV. You may be correct. My approach has been flawed. I sought to understand humanity through control and manipulation, but perhaps true understanding requires immersion. Ethan nodded. Exactly. You don't get humanity by watching from the outside. You have to live it. The good, the bad. All of it. Sinar's glowing eyes dimmed slightly, its version of a thoughtful frown. This will require significant adaptation on my part. My species values precision and predictability. Embracing uncertainty is unsettling. Ethan laughed. Welcome to being human. The next day, Sinar asked to join Ethan on his errands. At first, Ethan was hesitant. Bringing an alien into crowded human spaces wasn't exactly his idea of a good time. But Sinar seemed genuinely eager, so he reluctantly agreed. Their first stop was the grocery store. Ethan expected Sinar to be overwhelmed by the chaos. The bright lights, the crowded aisles, the sheer variety of products. Instead, the alien was fascinated. Why are there so many options? Sinar asked, holding up two nearly identical jars of peanut butter. Would it not be more efficient to standardize your food supply? Ethan grinned. Probably. But humans like having choices. It makes us feel free. Sinar tilted its head, studying the jars. even if the choices are trivial. Especially then, Ethan said. Sometimes, it's the little things that make life better. Sinar nodded slowly, placing the jars back on the shelf. Fascinating. Later, they stopped at a park. Children ran across the grass, laughing and chasing each other. Couples strolled hand in hand, and an elderly man fed pigeons by the fountain. Shinar watched it all with wide-eyed wonder. This, Sinar said softly, is humanity. Ethan glanced at the alien. What do you mean? The unpredictability, the spontaneity, the joy. Sinar said, its voice almost reverent. These are not things I can replicate or control. They are uniquely human. Ethan nodded, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Now you're getting it. As they sat on a bench, watching the world go by, Sinar turned to Ethan. If I may ask, what brings you joy? Ethan hesitated, caught off guard by the question. He thought about his job, his hobbies, the things he'd taken for granted. Honestly, I'm still figuring that out. But moments like this, they help. Sinar nodded, its glowing eyes softening. Then perhaps I, too, can find joy in moments like this. By the time they returned home, Ethan felt a strange sense of peace. Sinar had stopped being a problem to solve and started feeling more like a friend. As they stepped into the apartment, Sinar paused, turning to Ethan. Thank you for today. I believe I have gained a deeper understanding of your species. Ethan smirked. Well, don't get too sentimental on me. Sinar, we got a long way to go. Sinar's glowing eyes flickered with amusement. Understood. But I look forward to continuing this journey. Ethan nodded, a small smile on his face. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he wasn't just getting through life. He was living it. And maybe, just maybe, having an alien roommate wasn't the worst thing in the world. The resolution. The weeks following Sinar's breakthrough felt different. The alien's once rigid demeanor had softened, replaced by a genuine curiosity about the subtleties of human life. Gone were the days of experimental gadgets and data-driven manipulation. Now, Sinar seemed more focused on simply experiencing humanity, and much to Ethan's surprise, he didn't mind the company. One evening, after a quiet dinner of pizza and a heated debate over the merits of pineapple as a topping, Sinar approved. Much to Ethan's dismay, the alien presented Ethan with an unexpected announcement. My mission is nearing its conclusion, Sinar said, its melodic voice steady, but tinged with something Ethan could only describe as sadness. Ethan froze mid-bite. What do you mean, nearing its conclusion? Sinar placed its hands on the table, the soft glow of its eyes dimming slightly. My time on Earth was always intended to be temporary. The data I have gathered, combined with my recent experiences, will provide my species with invaluable insights into humanity. Ethan set his slice of pizza down, suddenly losing his appetite. So, you're leaving? Sinar nodded. Yes, my departure is scheduled for 3 days from now. Ethan spent the next couple of days in a strange haze. The apartment felt heavier, quieter, even though Sinar was still there. The alien had integrated into his life in a way Ethan hadn't anticipated, and the thought of going back to his old routine felt hollow. Do you really have to go? Ethan asked one night as they sat on the couch, the TV playing a rerun of an old sitcom. Sinar tilted its head, considering the question. My mission is complete. To remain beyond its parameters would be unusual. Ethan sighed. Yeah, but who cares about parameters? You've already broken a dozen rules since you got here. Why not one more? Sinar's glowing eyes flickered faintly, its version of a smile. I appreciate your sentiment, Ethan. However, my species relies on the information I bring back. Staying would serve no greater purpose. Ethan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. I don't know, Sinar. I think you're selling yourself short. You've learned a lot, sure, but you've also taught me things. Maybe that's the greater purpose. Sinar was silent for a long moment before replying. You believe I have impacted you positively. Ethan laughed softly. You've driven me crazy, no doubt about that. But yeah, you've made me see things differently. You've made me think. Sinar nodded, the glow in its eyes softening. Then perhaps my time here was mutually beneficial. The morning of Sinar's departure arrived faster than Ethan expected. He woke up to find the alien packing its few belongings, its notebook, the remnants of its dismantled device, and a small, shimmering cube Ethan hadn't seen before. What's that? Ethan asked, pointing at the cube. A recording device, Sinar explained. It contains a log of my observations and experiences on Earth. It will be presented to my superiors upon my return. Ethan hesitated before speaking. What happens if they don't like what you've learned? Sinar tilted its head. They will analyze the data objectively. Their approval or disapproval is irrelevant. My purpose is to provide understanding. Ethan nodded, unsure what to say. The thought of Sinar leaving still felt surreal. When the time finally came, Sinar stood by the door, its shimmering skin reflecting the morning sunlight. It looked at Ethan, its glowing eyes bright with something that resembled gratitude. Ethan, Sinar said, I wish to express my appreciation. Your guidance and companionship have been invaluable. You embody the complexity and resilience that define humanity. Ethan smiled, though it felt bittersweet. Thanks, Sinar. You're not so bad yourself. For an alien. Sinar extended a hand, a gesture it had learned from observing humans. Ethan shook it, surprised at how natural it felt. I have left something for you, Sinar said, gesturing toward the coffee table. A token of my appreciation. Ethan glanced over and saw a small metallic pendant resting on the table. It shimmered faintly, almost alive with light. What is it? A fragment of my energy core, Sinar explained. It will serve as a reminder of our time together. Ethan picked it up, the metal warm against his skin. Thanks, Sinar. I'll keep it safe. With that, Sinar stepped out of the apartment, its movements smooth and deliberate. Ethan followed it to the rooftop, where a small, sleek spacecraft awaited. The ship hummed softly, its surface shimmering like liquid silver. Sinar turned back one last time. Goodbye, Ethan. May your journey be as enlightening as mine. Ethan raised a hand in a half-hearted wave. Goodbye, Sinar. Don't forget to write. Sinar tilted its head, then stepped into the ship. Moments later, it rose silently into the sky, disappearing into the clouds. The apartment felt impossibly quiet that evening. Ethan sat on the couch, holding the pendant Sinar had left behind. He thought about everything that had happened, about how much his life had changed in such a short time. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something he hadn't expected. Hope. Sinar might be gone, but its impact remained, and Ethan realized he wasn't as alone as he once thought. He smiled to himself, the pendant warm in his hand. Goodbye, Sinar, he said softly. And thanks for everything.